For a long time, I always thought that to change my life, I had to do something truly monumental. Like waking up one morning and deciding to run 10 km every day. Or setting a goal to read 50 books in a year. Or even thinking about changing jobs, moving houses, and starting over from scratch. In my mind back then, change was always synonymous with dramatic, forceful turns, and for that very reason, most of the time I only thought about IT, but never actually did IT. I remember once buying a brand new pair of running shoes. I spent hours online reading reviews, comparing prices, and finally placed the order. When the shoes arrived, I told myself, tomorrow, I will start a new journey and become a real runner. But then, those shoes sat in the corner of my room for months. The excuses were endless. I'm busy today. It's raining tomorrow. I feel tired the day after. Or I'll just wait for the beginning of the week to make IT feel right in the end. The change never happened, leaving only a dusty pair of shoes behind. That story didn't just happen with the shoes. IT repeated itself in many aspects of my life. From learning a foreign language and writing to even maintaining my mental health. I realized the truth: people often fail to change. Not because they lack willpower, but because they set their goals too high. From the very beginning, it wasn't until I chanced upon a saying that everything truly shifted. You don't have to change your life in a day. You just have to change one small action today. That sentence was like a seed planted in my mind. I started to think, what if I didn't start by running 10 km? But just by walking for 10 minutes around my house? What would change if instead of reading 50 books a year, I just spent 10 minutes each night reading a few pages? And so I tried the first day. I just walked 10 minutes, no more. I still remember the awkward feeling as I walked, thinking, is this even useful? It's too little, it's insignificant. But I persisted on the second day. I walked for another 10 minutes. The third, the fourth. I kept walking, and then a week passed. To my surprise, I started to feel lighter. My mind less heavy. What was interesting was that after about 2 weeks, I started wanting to walk longer. I tried increasing it to 15 minutes, then 20 before long. I was jogging for a short distance, and then one day I realized I had run 3 km without forcing myself at all. The same thing happened with reading. Instead of pressuring myself to read a lot, I started with just a few pages before bed. Half a month later, I had finished a whole book. Something I had never been persistent enough to do before. From these small experiences, I learned a truth. Great change is actually built from small, consistent, repeated habits. A small habit is like a seed. When you plant it, it's almost invisible. No one recognizes its value. But over time, that seed sprouts, grows into a tree, and one day provides shade. Patience is the soil, and repetition is the water and sunlight that nourish that seed. Looking back, I see I was just like many people, always dreaming of a massive change, but overlooking the power of small things. I wanted a different life immediately, but I was unwilling to take the small steps toward it. That's why I often failed, felt discouraged, and then gave up. The irony is, when I stopped daydreaming about distant goals and focused only on one small action each day, real change finally began. In this section, I want to share with you 3 perspectives I've drawn from my own experience. Small habits are easier to start than big goals because they don't intimidate us. Anyone can walk for 10 minutes. Whereas running 10 km sounds exhausting before you even start. Small habits build self-belief. Every time we complete a small task, we feel capable. That feeling of I can do it is the real fuel. Small habits accumulate over time. A single grain of sand is nothing, but many grains can create a beach. A small habit can change how we see ourselves, and from there change our entire life. I remember reading a great example. If you improve by just 1% every day after a year, you will be nearly 37 times better than when you started. That number doesn't come from giant leaps, but from small, quiet, yet persistent steps. And that is the power of small habits. A power that seems invisible, but can turn a whole life around. How small habits reprogram the brain. I used to be very curious. Why does a small, repeated action have such immense power? Upon researching, I learned about a mechanism in our brain called neuroplasticity. It means that our neurons form and strengthen new pathways when we perform an action repeatedly. For example, the first time you brush your teeth, you have to concentrate and are clumsy. But after a few dozen times, you can brush your teeth while thinking about a song, or even while checking your phone. The habit becomes sulfur monoxide ingrained. That it happens almost automatically. The same is true for positive habits. If you practice journaling for 5 minutes every day, after a few weeks your brain will consider it an essential part of your evening. Without effort you'll pick up a pen and write. And from those 5 minutes, you might extend it to 20 minutes, an hour, or even a book. After a year, science proves that small habits trigger the habit loop, consisting of a cue, a routine, and a reward. When our brain recognizes a reward, even a very small one after an action, it motivates us to repeat that action. And the more we repeat it, the stronger the neural pathway becomes. In other words, small habits are how we reprogram our own brains. The story of a glass of water. One of the smallest, yet most impactful habits I ever tried was drinking a glass of water after waking up. It sounds like nothing special. Everyone drinks water. But the difference was that I intentionally turned it into a habit that started my day. The first day I placed a glass of water by my bed before going to sleep. When I woke up, the first thing I did wasn't grab my phone, but drink that glass of water. It felt strange. My throat was soothed. My body felt more awake, and most importantly, I felt like I had accomplished something right at the start of my day. That feeling of accomplishment was the reward. And from that glass of water, I gradually added other small habits. Making the bed, taking 3 deep breaths, opening the window to let in the light. It only took a few minutes, but my entire morning felt completely different. If you ask, did this make any big difference? Quote, the answer is yes. But not immediately. After a month, I felt less tired in the mornings. After 3 months, I started doing light exercises because my body had grown accustomed to the feeling of starting the day with something good for myself. And it all began with a single glass of water. The domino effect and the power of consistency. There's a fascinating concept called the domino effect. When one small habit is formed, it often triggers many other changes. Just like one falling domino can cause a whole row to topple. I can use myself as an example. The habit of drinking water in the morning led to the habit of doing a few stretching exercises. The stretching habit led me to pay more attention to my posture when sitting at work. Paying attention to my posture resulted in less back pain and a better mood. When I was in a better mood, I worked more effectively, which gave me more free time to read. From the outside, people might think I completely changed my lifestyle. But in reality, everything started with just one small action. A glass of water every morning. This made me realize we don't need to change everything at once. We just need to change one starting point and let it spread to other aspects of our lives. The difference between motivation and habits. I used to rely heavily on motivation. Whenever I watched an inspiring video or read a good book, I felt full of energy and wanted to do something big. But motivation is like the wind. It comes and goes quickly. This morning you're fired up. but tomorrow morning you just want to lie in bed. That's why I often started with a bang, but gave up halfway through. It was only when I learned to rely on small habits, instead of motivation, that I truly changed. Habits don't need inspiration. You don't need to feel like IT to brush your teeth. Just as you don't need to be motivated to drink a glass of water. You just do it, and when you do it long enough, it becomes automatic. I realized motivation is the spark, but habit is the enduring flame. How small habits change how you see yourself. Here's something interesting. Every time we maintain a small habit, we not only change our actions, but also how we see ourselves. For example, when you walk for 10 minutes every day, you start to think, I am someone who cares about my health. When you read a few pages every night, you think I am a learner. When you write a short journal entry, you think I am someone who listens to myself. This change may seem small, but it's actually profound, because actions create identity, and identity in turn directs action. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. That's why I've come to see that small habits don't just help us get more done. More importantly, they make us become a different person. Better, stronger, and more confident. If you look at the developmental journey of humans, from our time as hunter-gatherers to the technological age, one common thread remains. We are shaped by the things we do repeatedly every day. Humans don't truly change because of one grand decision, but because of small actions, repeated long enough to create a new trajectory. I believe small habits are like foundational bricks. A house cannot be sturdy without small, solid bricks. Likewise, a life cannot be sustainable if it relies only on fleeting inspiration. A person can be bursting with energy for a few days or weeks, but without small habits, they will quickly fall back into the cycle of procrastination and failure. What impresses me is the compounding power of habits. For example, a person starts the habit of drinking a glass of water in the morning. At first glance, this habit seems insignificant, but gradually they feel healthier and more energetic. With more energy, they start exercising. Exercise clears their mind, which helps them work more effectively. One small initial action, just drinking water, has initiated a whole chain of positive reactions. In psychology, there is a concept called the compound effect. It's like putting money in a savings account. You might only deposit a small amount each day, but after a few years, the accumulated sum becomes enormous. Habits are the same. Each small action may seem negligible in the short term, but when repeated consistently, it creates a massive difference in the long run. An example I always remember is the story of runner Eliud Kipchoge, the first person to run a marathon in under 2 hours. He didn't achieve this feat with any single magical stride, but with millions of small, steady steps day after day. Every small habit in his diet, sleep, and training compounded to lead him to an achievement that astonished the world. Small habits don't just create success. They also have the power to change how a person sees themselves. When you maintain a small action, you are sending a signal to your subconscious that I am a disciplined person, or I am someone who takes care of myself. This belief over time becomes part of your identity. And when your identity changes, all your life decisions change with it. Many people wait for motivation to act, but motivation, like a flame, often flares up and then dies down. Habits are different. They are like a quiet stream, weak at first but growing stronger over time. And once formed, they become self-sustaining. That's why I always believe that, instead of chasing grand goals, you should start by planting a small habit. Stick with it and let it grow to create great changes on its own. If you want to change your life, don't think about transforming overnight. Start with one small thing you can do right now. Write down 3 things you're grateful for each day. Walk for 10 minutes after a meal. Read one page of a book before bed. One day you will realize that these seemingly trivial things have quietly rewritten your destiny. The science of starting small. One of the reasons many people fail to change their lives is that they set expectations that are too high. From the start, for instance, someone wanting to lose weight might think they need to run 10 km a day, follow a strict diet, and hit the gym for 2 hours. But when they try both, their body and mind rebel. Running 10 km on the first day might bring a sense of pride, but by the third day their muscles are sore, and their brain starts making excuses. It's okay to take one day off. And once you take one day off, it's easy to take a second, then a third, until you quit altogether. Interestingly, our brain doesn't like sudden changes. From a biological perspective, the brain always seeks to conserve energy. It prefers familiar paths, pre-programmed habits. Therefore, forcing yourself to change too quickly is like trying to turn a giant ship in a few seconds. It's nearly impossible. So what's the solution? The answer lies in micro-habits. This is a concept I'm extremely passionate about, after many personal experiments and observations. Instead of starting with a 10 km run, just put on your shoes and step outside. Instead of reading 50 pages a night, commit to reading a single page. These actions are so small, they consume almost nitrogen monoxide willpower, yet they trick the brain into accepting the change. And then something magical happens. Once you've put on your shoes and stepped outside, you rarely just stand there and go back in. You'll walk for a few minutes, maybe even jog a little. Once you've opened a book and read one page, you'll often read a few more. Micro-habits are like the spark that ignites the engine, helping you get started without much pressure. Science calls this the effect of behavioral inertia. Starting is the hardest part, but once in motion, the body and mind tend to maintain that momentum. It's like a rolling ball, it needs an initial push. But once it's rolling, you need very little energy to keep it going. I once read a study in the European Journal of Social Psychology, which found that it takes an average of 66 days for a behavior to become an automatic habit. But the important thing is, you don't need to be perfect every day. In fact, the study showed that missing a day or two doesn't ruin the process. What matters is whether you get back on track. Here, an important principle emerges. A habit is formed not by perfection, but by the persistence of returning after each interruption. In other words, if you miss one day, it's okay. But if you miss 2 days in a row, the brain starts to register quitting as a new habit. A practical example I find very insightful is in personal finance. People often think that to save money, they need to make huge spending cuts or massive investments, but a principle many experts apply is to pay yourself first. That is, automatically transfer a very small amount of money, maybe just 1% of your income, into a savings fund every day or week. This amount might seem meaningless at first, but over time it grows into a large sum. Like exercise habits, this is a way of leveraging the compound effect of small actions. But it's not just about good habits. We also have to deal with bad ones. The brain doesn't distinguish between good and bad habits. It only knows repetition: smoking, scrolling through social media, eating sweets are all reinforced by the mechanism of immediate reward. A puff of a cigarette brings instant relaxation. A like on Facebook creates a feeling of validation. A piece of cake releases dopamine. Meanwhile, the benefits of good habits often come much later. Good health, career advancement, financial stability. Therefore, to build good habits and break bad ones, we need to change our relationship with rewards. One effective method is habit pairing. For example, only allowing yourself to listen to your favorite podcast while running, or placing candy in a hard-to-reach place, and replacing IT with fruit that's easily accessible. This is an application of the principle of environment design instead of relying solely on willpower. Adjust your surroundings to make good habits easier and bad habits harder. I've realized that long-term success in maintaining habits lies not in being tough on yourself, but in understanding your own mechanisms and knowing how to reprogram your environment. The habit loop and your personal identity. What fascinates me most about habits is how the brain automates behavior when an action is repeated. The brain gradually shifts IT from the prefrontal cortex, which handles conscious thought and decision-making, to the basal ganglia, a part that controls automatic behaviors. This is why we can brush our teeth, or type a Wi-Fi password almost without thinking. This process saves the brain a tremendous amount of energy, but IT also means that once a habit is formed, the brain becomes extremely lazy about changing IT. That's why many people find IT hard to quit smoking, even though they know it's harmful, or why checking your phone before bed becomes an almost irresistible reflex. From a personal perspective, I used to have a bad habit. Whenever I was stressed, I would open my phone to scroll through social media. At first, I thought just a few minutes, but I would get sucked in for hours. After a while, I realized I wasn't reading books or focusing on work, like before. Interestingly, the act of opening my phone was nitrogen monoxide longer a conscious decision. IT had become an automatic behavior, triggered as soon as I felt stressed. From that experience, I learned an important lesson. To break a bad habit, you need more than just willpower. You need to break the triggering cue. For me, this meant leaving my phone in another room while working, or putting social media apps in a hard-to-find folder. IT sounds simple, but just changing the initial cue significantly reduced my wasted time. Speaking of QS, behavioral scientists have developed a model called the cue routine reward loop. This is the basic cycle of every habit. Cue a trigger, which can be a time, a place, an emotion, or a preceding action routine. The behavior that is repeated after the cue. Reward, the feeling of satisfaction that the behavior provides, which reinforces the loop. For example, you feel bored. Cue right, pointing arrow, open your phone and scroll through TikTok routine. Right pointing arrow, laugh at a funny video, reducing boredom reward. When this loop is repeated many times, it becomes a habit. So to build a good habit, you can change the routine, but keep the cue and reward the same. For instance, when you feel bored, cue. Instead of scrolling TikTok routine, you could go for a 5-minute walk or listen to music. New routine, and still get a feeling of relaxation reward. With repetition, the new behavior will replace the old one. Additionally, there's a crucial element often overlooked: personal identity. When you start a habit, just because you want to achieve a result, you're likely to give up when the result doesn't come quickly. But when the habit is tied to the identity you want to build, it becomes much more sustainable. For example, instead of saying I want to run to lose weight, say I am a person who enjoys being active. I care about my health. Identifying yourself as a runner makes running a natural part of your life, not just a task to be completed. I've also noticed that the social environment has a massive influence on habits. If you live in a family where everyone eats healthily, you're likely to eat healthily too. If you have a group of friends who regularly go to the gym, you'll tend to work out more. Conversely, if you're in an environment full of people who stay up late, are addicted to coffee, and are inactive, forming good habits will be much harder. In other words, we often unconsciously copy the behaviors of the community around us. I once tested this by joining an online book club. Initially, I only planned to read a few pages a day. But when I saw dozens of others sharing that they had read 20 to 30 pages, I naturally didn't want to fall behind. As a result, in 2 months, I read more than I had in the entire previous year. The environment truly has a power that is hard for an individual to resist. The final point I want to emphasize is the difference between discipline and willpower. Willpower is like a fire that burns brightly, but quickly fades, while discipline is like a gas stove that can maintain a steady flame for a long time. If you rely entirely on willpower to maintain a habit, you will fail on days when you're tired, stressed, or unmotivated. But if you build discipline by designing your environment, tying habits to your identity, in setting clear cues, you will create a system that runs almost automatically. Habits as proof of your identity. There's a saying I love: you cannot change your life until you change something you do daily. The secret of your success is found in your daily routine. This quote reminds me of a simple yet powerful truth. Habits not only shape our results, but also shape who we are. When I look back at different stages of my life, I realized my personal identity, who I believed I was always tied to the habits I maintained at the time. There was a time I believed I was a writer because I sat at the keyboard for at least 30 minutes every morning. At another time, I thought of myself as a workaholic because I regularly stayed up until 2 to 3 a.m. chasing deadlines. My identity wasn't fixed. It changed based on the habits I repeated daily. From this perspective, we can see an important principle. Habits are tangible proof of your beliefs about yourself. If you want to believe you are a healthy person, every time you step into the gym, even for just a few minutes, you are reinforcing that belief. If you want to become proficient in a foreign language, every time you open a vocabulary app, you are giving your brain evidence to believe in that new identity. I realized that the biggest problem causing many people to fail at self-improvement is that they try to change the outcome before changing their identity. They set goals like lose 10 kilograms, earn $5,000, or finish writing a book. But these goals often create immense pressure. And when they don't achieve them immediately, they easily give up. In contrast, if they start by building an identity, I am a healthy person, I am someone who manages finances well, I am a writer, then every small action becomes a step in reinforcing that belief. The results will then follow as a natural consequence. A simple example: I once wanted to become a more avid reader. Initially, I set the goal to read 50 books this year. But after just a few weeks, I found myself counting pages like it was a chore, not truly enjoying it. Eventually, I changed my approach. Instead of reading 50 books, I simply thought I am a person who reads every day. And every day, just opening a book and reading one page was enough. As a result, I ended up reading far more, without feeling any pressure. From this, I drew a conclusion. Personal identity comes not from declarations, but from small repeated habits. A runner isn't someone who runs a marathon once, but someone who runs 2 to 3 times a week, consistently for months. A writer isn't someone who publishes one book, but someone who writes a few hundred words every day. Another interesting factor is the strong link between habits and self-esteem. Every time you promise yourself you'll do something and you succeed, your self-esteem rises. Conversely, every time you promise but fail, your self-esteem drops, and gradually you start to believe, I'm just the type of person who can't change. This is a dangerous spiral many people fall into. I experienced this when I tried to wake up early. I set my alarm for 5 a.m., but hit the snooze button almost every day. After a few weeks, I not only felt like a failure, but also started to doubt myself. Maybe I'm not a disciplined person. But then I changed my strategy. Instead of trying to wake up at 5 a.m., I just aimed to wake up 15 minutes earlier than usual. This was much easier, and when one succeeded, I felt a sense of victory. That feeling gradually reinforced the belief that I could control my habits. And from there, I continued to gradually increase the challenge. From this experience, I saw clearly that every small habit not only changes your behavior, but also rewrites the story you tell about yourself. And when that story changes, your whole life changes with it. How social identity shapes our habits. Another fascinating aspect of habits is how they build our public image. It's nitrogen monoxide coincidence that some people are known as the bookworm or the tireless worker. These labels aren't self-proclaimed. They are assigned by the community after observing their repeated habits. At that point, our personal identity doesn't just exist in our minds. It's confirmed by the community. I remember a close friend of mine. Initially, he just wanted to learn guitar for fun, practicing 10 to 15 minutes a day. But after a year of persistence, without any grand announcement, everyone around him started calling him the guitarist of the group. From then on, he became more confident and dedicated even more time to music. This proves that a small habit can turn into a social identity, and that social identity in turn reinforces the habit. But identity can also be contagious. We don't just build our own image. We are also influenced by our community. This is why someone who joins a gym group is more likely to stick with the habit than someone who works out alone. When you see others calling themselves runners or vegans, you are more likely to adopt that identity, even if you previously had nitrogen monoxide similar habits. I experienced this when I joined a writing community. At first, I only wrote sporadically and didn't think of myself as a writer. But after joining the group and seeing everyone share their work and call each other young writers, I gradually began to believe that I could belong to that community. And from this new belief, I maintained a daily writing habit. In other words, identity can be acted out first, and then the habit will fill the gap. This strategy of acting the part is truly effective. For example, if you want to become a runner, try doing what a runner does. Buy a good pair of shoes, sign up for a race. Follow a few running vloggers. You don't need to become a professional athlete overnight, but when you act as if you are already part of that group, your brain and behavior will gradually adapt. This is how many people have successfully changed their lives. Fake it till you make it. I love the historical example of Benjamin Franklin. He was famous not only for his inventions, but also for his system of 13 virtues that he used to cultivate himself. Instead of just saying, "I want to be a better person," Franklin broke down his desired identity into specific habits: frugality, patience, humility, etc. Each day he recorded his progress, evaluated himself, and saw the practice of these habits as proof that he was becoming the person he wanted to be. This shows that identity is formed not by grand promises, but by small, repeated evidence day after day. Another point I realized is that when identity is linked to a habit, it helps you get through the temporary slump phase. Every habit has moments when interest wanes. A writer will have days they don't want to write. A gym goer will have times they feel heavy. And a language learner will sometimes feel discouraged. But if you are only attached to the goal, you will easily quit when motivation runs out. However, if you are attached to your identity, I am a writer, I am a person who loves to move, I am a lifelong learner, you will continue the action. Because that action is nitrogen monoxide longer about achieving a goal, but about maintaining your identity. This reminds me of a quote from James Clear's Atomic Habits: every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. I find this quote to be incredibly true. To my experience, no one needs you to be perfect from the start. You just need to cast enough votes in the direction you choose, and eventually you will win. Finally, I want to talk about the connection between habits, identity, and personal freedom. There's a paradox: the more you live by habits, the freer you become. It sounds contradictory. But think about it: if you have to struggle every day over whether to exercise, read a book, or save money, you will be exhausted by hundreds of small decisions. But if these things have become part of your identity, you nitrogen monoxide longer need to decide. You simply do them like breathing. This automation frees up mental energy for you to focus on bigger, more creative decisions, building a life from small changes. If we look back, we'll see a truth. Every great change starts with a small one. A mountaineer doesn't start by conquering Everest, but with the first steps on a small hill. A brilliant musician was once a child playing clumsy. Oh, if F-beat notes, all the great things in human history were built on the foundation of small habits, repeated over the years. What matters isn't how much you change in one day, but for how many consecutive days you maintain that change. Someone who reads 10 pages a day will have read over 3,600 pages in a year, equivalent to 12 to 15 books. Someone who saves $2 a day will have over $7,300 in 10 years, not including interest. Someone who exercises for 20 minutes a day will, after a few years, have a level of health that many would envy. I realized that the power of small changes lies in the compound interest of habits. Like money in a bank, habits also accumulate over time. Every right action, nitrogen monoxide, matter how small, is an investment in your future self. And just like with finances, the earlier you start, the greater the benefits. However, a common mistake is waiting for motivation to begin. But motivation isn't always available. Instead, let small habits lead the way for motivation. When you start with a simple action, you create momentum. This momentum will generate motivation, and motivation will then reinforce the habit. This is a positive cycle. For example, instead of setting a goal to work out for 1 hour every day, you can start with, go to the gym and work out for 5 minutes. It sounds ridiculous, but it's effective. Because the first goal isn't to have a perfect workout, but to become the type of person who doesn't skip a workout. Once you've stepped into the gym, you will rarely stop at just 5 minutes. And if on some days you really only do 5 minutes, you've at least maintained the habit chain. This is tied to an important concept: small wins instead of hoping for a giant leap. Focus on small victories every day. Writing a short paragraph, learning 5 new words, decluttering for 5 minutes. These small wins accumulate gradually. And more importantly, they nurture the belief, I am a person who can do this. Furthermore, to build a life from small changes, we need to pay attention to our environment. Humans are easily influenced by their surroundings. If you want to eat healthier, don't keep junk food in the house. If you want to read more, place books where you can easily see them. If you want to exercise, leave your sneakers by the door. The environment is the silent ally that helps you maintain habits long term. Another key factor is patience. Many people give up just because they don't see immediate results. But the truth is, results often come much later than the actions. It's like boiling water. From 20 degrees Celsius to 99 degrees Celsius. The water isn't boiling yet, but every degree of increase is crucial. At 100 degrees Celsius, it explodes into steam. Habits are the same. There will be days when you act without seeing any change. But if you are patient enough, you will reach a breakthrough point finally. Remember this: a life is not built by rare, grand decisions, but by the small actions repeated every single day. Habits are the bricks, and your identity is the house you are building. And nitrogen monoxide, one else, but you will live in that house.